it over to our illustrious mayor to share some opening remarks and we'll get started.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I'm so pleased that we are in the midst of something that I think is going to be a transformative process in more ways than one for Durham, right? And so I'm going to be interactive tonight. I really want us to get some work done. Where we have disagreements or agreements, you need to have some recommendations that can be written to the city council as they begin their deliberation. So we're going to ask you all to do this. Please leave egos at the door. Please bring your knowledge and love of Durham in. So that's our basic ground rule, is we're gonna bring our knowledge in and our love in for Durham, and we got a lot of knowledge around the table about Durham. So we can do this, we're gonna get there, and I'm gonna try to move this along. When I see y'all getting home, I'm gonna move it along. But these two people that I'm honored to work with want to facilitate the process, but I understand that you all have pretty much come to where you have points of disagreement. Would that be correct, Dr. Elaine? Where you have disagreements? You pretty kind of know those? Okay, so we're gonna open it up. We're gonna open it up, and then, so do you know what your points of agreements are?
No.
No. All right, that's all I need to know. Oh, we have a scribe. Volunteers.
It's really, ACLP and volunteers,
Yeah,
only for the mayor.
all right.
Thank you.
All right, so as stated yesterday, we got a lot of the generalities out of the way, not necessarily out of the way. We were able to put them out there, and it sort of helped us understand the context that we'll be discussing. Tonight, we were to really bring some specific points out of the policy proposal to the table to discuss. And there are, I think it's probably, I was going to suggest identifying what we agree on and what we don't agree on, but the document is so big. I'm thinking that it may be best to just, it may be best to see which points each person wanted to discuss, and we will assume that the ones that we did not, we can actually assume that those are okay on both sides. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. All right, so what we can do, we can start at the table, and again, what we'll do is, put my glasses on here. I just see white, black lines on the paper. All right, so in the SCAD document, there, which is TC 220001, on the far left column, affected UDO paragraphs. So these codes are which part and what article. On it, just the far left column. So the very first one is 3.7.2. So that column we'll use to identify which item we'd like to discuss. Does that make sense to everyone?
We don't all have it.
So that's why I asked yesterday to bring those tonight. So you have some policy points and we could identify.
I have the SCAD document. Are you going to go through SCAD numerically?
So what I have before me is what we have online, which is what I referenced yesterday.
What I have about 42 points that we.
Are you referring to SCAD or are you referring to the staff?
This is what is this? Yeah, that report, right? Detailed analysis. Yeah. That report.
I don't have that.
Okay, well, what we'll
But I have
do,
SCAD itself.
okay, so you are, as the applicants are familiar with the points, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what we will do is we'll identify the policy topic, and we'll do that by each person, and we'll be able to document those, and then we'll go through each one. And we'll give some time to each one, and we will be able to have that discussion. And that way, everyone around the table, specifically the opponents to the document, will be able to have those addressed. So.
Well, It might be a little bit easier if we start with, the point that, Tom Miller made yesterday about buffers. If we can go through that, that might be a good way to kind of round up the conversation so that we can see where we can agree and can't. And I know that you noted that the buffers were being removed and, the SCAD document. And I don't know what the staff report says about that, but we can probably start with that.
So if we want to start with buffers, we can do that. Let's, see which one that is.
So, effective UDO would be 4.6.6C1. I think that's 6.7.
6.7 is right. But I don't do that.
6.7.
So you're in 6.7.6. And in the staff report, that's topic 15 on page 35.
That's 6.7.6.
That's one of them, and then also buffers come up in, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
9.4, 9.4, 9.4.5C4, but these are all listed on page 35.
Is that the staff report that you're looking at?
And 36.
What was the number?
On the staff report, topic 15, and then the sections in the UDO paragraphs is 6.7.6, and then 9.4.1H, and then 9.4.3C.3, and 9.4.5C.4, and that's it.
So if anyone wanted to start and responded to Tom Miller's comments yesterday around buffers.
Tom, could you restate?
Certainly, thank you. So my concern about buffers is on two levels. And the first one has to do with reducing buffers to differences between what we call top level use categories. Because we buffer, in my opinion, in order to protect the quality of life of less intense uses from the potential impacts of more intense uses. And intensity is a function of use type and development intensity. So to reduce buffers to these top level use categories, in my opinion, neglects the problem that happens when you have a single family house or a single family neighborhood next to a use category where a much more intense level of development is allowed. And so an example that comes to mind are the places where traditional neighborhoods share a boundary with like the downtown or 9th Street design districts, but these can also be other places like places where general commercial zoning obtains and buildings can rise to a high level. I think there should be a buffer between some sort of buffer between a traditional neighborhood with low intensity residential uses and buildings that rise 7, 8, 9 stories tall, 100 feet. This would eliminate that buffer. The other thing that's not clear to me is we talk about use categories, but we also promote here, and it's actually happening in my neighborhood, combined uses where we have residential and commercial building uses combined in the same building. Something I applaud, but when we allow that, in what use category, top level use category, does such a building fall for the purposes of determining the appropriateness of buffers? You don't get an answer out of this document. The second area, and this is the area where I quite frankly am just as concerned, is SCAD would eliminate buffers for a whole bunch of non-residential uses on lots that are 20,000 square feet or smaller. And if you look at the zoning atlas, at the places where neighborhoods and commercial properties intersect, almost all of the properties on the commercial side of that dividing line are smaller than 20,000 square feet. So what is cast as an exception in SCAD is actually the rule. But SCAD goes further by allowing a broad band of current commercial zoning categories and non-residential zoning categories to develop under the CI dimensional standards. Then what will occur is, because SCAD changes the CI dimensional standards to require no side yard lot lines and allow buildings to essentially leap over lot lines, you can have a whole bunch of lots, commercial lots that are 50 or 60 feet wide and 150 feet deep, much smaller than 20,000 square feet, which by the way is a small half acre. You're going to have one building that goes from lot to lot to lot to lot, and all of a sudden you have a fairly intense commercial use that's not small. And because a property owner can shift lot lines at their discretion without review, you can essentially fix almost any piece of property that backs up to a neighborhood to be exempt from any buffer requirements. I think that's wrong. And also SCAD in that CI moves the, thank you so much, moves the rear yard requirement to 10 feet in CI. Then you can have a commercial building that's within 10 feet of a home on the other side of the zoning boundary with no buffer. And that 10 feet can be used for all kinds of things that, in my opinion, could negatively impact the quality of life that someone enjoys in the home and destabilize the neighborhood on the other side. I just don't think that's acceptable. Now, can we talk about what buffers are appropriate in what situations? Yes, we can. Right now, we have a limited number of buffer options. They look at zoning categories. We have a table that says what buffers go where. I think that we could keep all our current options, some of which are just the base buffer requirement, which is a strip of land a certain width with planting with a certain opacity. That. The other options are reducing the width of that piece of property to a smaller strip of land, but with a more opaque buffer, usually in the form of a wall, a berm, or a hedge. And then the third one is called the interactive buffer model, which is software that the city uses, and they plug in data and it spits out a buffer. I think that we could do more and we could make buffers less expensive. Building a masonry wall in every instance, in my opinion, is not necessarily the way to go when an opaque wooden fence would be much cheaper and might do the same job just as well. It does depend on what's being built on the other side. And I think we could become much more intentional in having buffers that don't use up a lot of land, that are cheaper to construct, and just as effective at protecting residential quality of life on the other side of that commercial residential boundary. And that's an area that I'm interested in working on, but I can't agree with SCAD's just doing away with buffers. And these streets are everywhere. Broad Street on it. You got Walltown on one side and Watts Hillendale on the other, Hillsborough Road and Old West Durham, Fayetteville Street, Gear Street. All of these streets are long commercial strips with residential neighborhoods backing up to them. If we adopt SCAD like it's written, the buffer requirement will go away pretty much for all of these places.
Thank you. So Mr. Miller and everyone else too for heads up. We want to make sure we're not limiting your dialogue time, but we do want to make sure we can be able to have a discussion around it so we can try to make points more succinct. Could you respond to the buffer concern, please?
Would like that. The genesis of the
buffer conversation was the frequently encountered buffer between different zoning districts, even when the uses were compatible. For example, there are a number of zoning districts in Durham which allow residential to be next to each other, whereas the buffer requirements are attached to the zoning districts. And when we had conversations about planning staff about how to address that, they said that that was really vexing for them as well, that they would support a change that allowed the reduction of buffers and or elimination of buffers between compatible zoning districts. SCAD was never intended to remove buffers between incompatible zoning districts. So I want to be clear about that. The staff has also made recommendations in their document that are worth reviewing. And I think we'll guide a conversation from here because they thought about this quite deeply. That your concerns are shared, Tom, that we do not want to see incompatible zoning districts butting up, or uses butting up against each other. Problem was zoning districts allow compatible uses, but the buffers were attached to the districts, not the uses. We're trying to correct that problem.
Yes, question.
Yes.
Oh, great. I was just gonna ask you, in what language corrects that problem? Because as I said yesterday, it is not written clearly in the ordinance. It doesn't matter what your intention is, because you won't necessarily be the person using it. Somebody else who has a different intention that's not so nice for the neighborhood might push that limit. So what is the language that prohibits the wrong use of that?
If you look at the details.
I'm sorry, Mr. Anthony. Yes. Also, let's make sure that we are announcing our name.
Oh, I'm Katie. Sorry, Katie Ross.
Jim Anthony's. If you look at the details of how SCAD is written, you'll see that we have addressed those differing uses in our table. And I know it's a dense read, it's boring, but they are there. So clarifications married together with recommendations from planning staff, married together with SCAD. We're supportive planning recommendations to make modifications per theirs.
Regina Mays. Mr. Anthony, can you give just a quick, example of where that is verified at? Just pull out one point that kind of sticks to what you just said about looking through this huge document. But it was just one quick example of where that can be seen.
Yes, absolutely. I'm gonna ask Bob if because he's got it up on his computer. I forgot my computer.
Yeah. I'm Bob Chapman. In UDO paragraph 9.4.1H, which eliminates project boundary buffers between uses in the same top level use category. The staff's comment is, what's the purpose of this, is that residential should not be required to buffer from residential. And then their comment is currently buffers are required between the same types of uses. For example, residential to residential, commercial to commercial, etc. And then their analysis and recommendation is that project buffers are intended to mitigate impacts between properties. Staff recommends this change as buffering between the same types of uses is not necessary since they produce the same impacts. However, they also recommend evaluating the effectiveness and impact of this change as part of the EUDO rewrite.
Can you repeat which one that was?
That was UDO paragraph 9.4.1 capital H.
I just I'm a little concerned about constantly referring to what the staff says and thinks when the staff is not present. Because I'm not sure the staff has considered the complaints that we're making. And they certainly wrote their recommendations without any input or reference from us. And so I would respectfully request that either we invite staff to participate with us, which I think would be very useful, because although I have spent a lot of time studying the UDO, I'm always like having someone who knows more than I do available to make sure that I'm on the right track, or that stops me when I'm on the wrong track. But we're not going to get anywhere with the response to all of our concerns is the staff likes it and here it is in the report. Because we don't like a lot of the stuff that the staff says is in here.
If I could just, also just narrow us in, I think what might be helpful is to say it in a little bit more of a plainer version, because I understand the UDO language works for folks who understand the UDO. But I think what we're talking about specifically, and why I'm trying to get us to a medium, is to understand that even if you're doing residential to residential, that could be a site that is existing with a single story, 900 square foot home. And then at a lot next to it, which is residential, you could be putting 4 units that are 2 to 3 stories tall next to it. And to say that there should be no buffer absolutely does not work. And so if you are persisting that there should be no buffers, even if it's the same use, I have a problem with that.
I'd like to respond to 2 things. One is I simply read what was written on the staff report. There was no editorial comment. And secondly, I remember meeting, this staff report was written on August the 23rd. Excuse me, I may have that off by a month, July 23rd. And I remember attending at least 3, if not 4 meetings downstairs in this building that you were there with 3, 4, and 5 staff members, and you brought up these same points. So it would not be accurate to say that they have not heard this from you.
I'd also like to say that eliminating buffers is very different from eliminating setbacks. So there are still building setbacks on all lots, with some exceptions where things are getting built, as Tom alluded to, against each other. We see some of this. That's a really important thing to understand. Setbacks still exist, and generally, I don't think there's any that are less than 10 feet. Maybe some 5-foot setbacks, but they sort of function like buffers. Buffers are different in that they require plantings and so forth. So Tom Miller again. So Bob, about the report, that version of the report came out when you said it did, but the original version of the report, which was the same report organized a different way, came out before our very first meeting. And a setback is not the same as buffer, and SCAD in a great many places reduces setbacks and eliminates them for like CI. So there's no side yard setback, and it reduces the rear yard setback and the street yard setback for CI. And then it allows CI, which is the commercial infill zone, which right now is a limited application. It allows those dimensional standards to be used almost across the board in our non-residential zoning categories. So it would become the standard for development. No side yard requirements, 10-foot rear yard requirement, no street requirement. So setbacks almost disappear in CI. As a matter of fact, in the original version of SCAD, and we objected to this to staff, this is at the meeting that we held where you guys didn't come. We pointed out that the original version of SCAD had no rear yard requirement in CI. And I said, does this mean that when a screen falls out of a window in a commercial building built in CI, that the owner has to ask permission of the resident who lives behind for permission to go onto their property to retrieve it? And the staff asked for a change there, and it was changed.
Excuse me, Mr. Chapman, this is this is Charlotte Burris. Okay, I hear all y'all talking, don't get me wrong, but when we ask for simplicity, we're talking about, we got people listening out in Durham right now. So when we ask for simplicity, what is a buffer? What's the definition for buffer? What's the definition for UDO? I'm just saying, because you got some people, we're throwing out acronyms, but you got some people actually don't know what you're talking about. I mean, they know what a driveway is, they know what a backyard is, they know what you understand what I'm saying? But listen, when we say simplicity, I mean ground simplicity. So that's what I want to hear tonight, besides the data, the statistics, and all of this. Let's really get to the deep meaning of this.
The buffer specifically.
Yeah.
Is a planting usually, whether it's a bush or a tree.
Okay.
And it can have an opacity, which allows for multiple trees, so that you don't have someone viewing into your window. A setback, so to speak, as we were talking about before, is how far away from the lot line a piece of property, or from the lot line that the property would start. Those are set by the UDO, which is United Development Ordinance for the city of Durham, which guides all of the zoning that happens. Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, that helps.
And I appreciate you making sure we keep it very simplified.
Yeah, and I apologize about that, Ms. Barrett. I fell into the assumption that everyone like read it and have, this substantive opposition or proposition. So thanks for bringing us back down to earth on the terminology. So I'll ask that everyone please try your best to limit the complicated use of acronyms.
Yes, sir, because I was just looking at the community aspect, about the acronyms. Thank you.
Ms. Ross?
Yeah, Katie Ross here. So I'm a little concerned that the talking here seems to be like it's a foregone conclusion that SCAD is going to pass, and we're just, giving you some input about if you want to fine tune it. But I don't think that should be a foregone conclusion, because we have not had the final public hearings on those. And secondly, I'd like to talk about the sort of cascading way that the proponents of this have proceeded back from way back when. They would start with the JCPC, meeting, I know what's going on even before this, but the first public hearing that I actually went back and listened to yesterday was the August 3rd, 2022 JCCPC meeting. And first of all, Sarah Young wrote me on August 23rd, 2 weeks, when was that? Last 5 weeks ago, whatever it was, August 23rd this year. And she said, when the original SCAD proposal was considered by the JCCPC, the staff recommendation was to wait, tackle the SCAD content and intent as part of the overall UDO rewrite, which is a very measured and smart position for them to take. The only reason they didn't change that, but they were directed. She says, however, the JCCPC directed staff to work with the applicants on their proposal so it could move forward in advance of the UDO rewrite. So the planning department was directed to approve parts of this and work with this. It doesn't mean that that is their true opinion. I believe they still think it should wait until the major rewrite. And at that what's also disturbing about the JCCPC meeting, when you hear it, is I think there were 7 people there. At least 5 of them had not read the document and were just relying on PowerPoints and representations by the proponents. Even the ones that read it, I think Wendy said she had skimmed it and had some concerns about the public engagement, which I'll get to. And Austin Amadalio, who is a planner, said he read it several times and still was confused by it. So I think that the fact that without reading it or without understanding it, the CPC still passed it on instead of saying, no, let's wait until we do understand it and have carefully read it and vetted it before we vote on it. That's the way I would think that public officials should act, not vote on things that they haven't read and don't really understand yet. So that's a major concern to me. And then it crescendoed on to, hey, let's get Habitat on. And I'll let you talk about that, but that there was just this kind of marketing thing. We're gonna be able to say that the JCCPC supported this, even though they hadn't read it. Then we're gonna say that Habitat supported it, and then that was a big scandal. So I have some real concerns about the way this has built up and the fact that there's just this assumption that it's gonna, it's a done deal, when I don't think it should be. I mean, I have more comments, but I'll just let that float out there now.
Thank you. So, staff, I know for a fact staff has put a great deal of work into it. And staff has, and actually at the request of the mayor is how we got this document here, this analysis here. Again, this was a legitimate process. Whether we like the process or not, that is what we can adjust, but I want to make sure that if you have an elected official that is just not, they just pass stuff without reading it, then should take issue with that elected official for sure. But I know I'm an elected official. I did a great deal of it, but I do want to get back to why we're here, as we stated yesterday. We aren't here to make final decisions today. We're here to make recommendations and considerations, and that will go to the public, the deciding body. This is an opportunity for anyone who have any issue with it to address the people who actually proposed it, and that's what we'll take back.
Well,
So-
I am kind of a little concerned that there's 182 paragraphs that are in the detailed analysis by topic. So I would definitely be concerned if there's some, I think if I understood what you said earlier, that somehow if we don't specifically address it, then it's going to assume we agree. And that is not necessarily the case at all. We won't have time probably to address 132 separate paragraphs for one thing. So that's a concern.
So,
Would you like to make a comment?
yes, I would like to make a comment and this is Tiana Joyner, and I am representing Habitat for Humanity of Durham. So Bob has referenced, and he has on his screen here, a picture of Jim, who was our interim CEO at the time, who was an interim for a reason. He did not have authority to attend the meeting to say that we were for SCAD. He did not have the knowledge, as I think you referenced. What's your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm Katie.
Katie, okay.
Yeah.
Katie, we met.
Yeah.
Katie referenced, there's many people that have not read the document. And both Jim, who was on our staff as an interim, and also Nicole, who was on our staff as the director of construction, stated that they did not read the full document. They read 4 points that was proposed to them from Aaron, who was not here, that basically highlighted the benefits of Habitat. When you're looking at a director of construction and an interim, if this is going to make their job easier, then of course they're thinking, oh, great, let's move forward with it. The board did not support this. And I didn't want to bring it up, but Bob has presented this on the screen. So I do want to address that. I mean, in my ideal world, this document should be thrown away. I know there's a lot of work that has been going into it, but our name was misappropriated from the beginning. Our name was put on the application. And anytime you see Habitat's name in affordable housing, anyone that doesn't read the document is going to think that it's good because Habitat means affordable housing, right? The name SCAD, Simplified Codes for Affordable Development. I've been asking someone to explain to me, how is this going to bring additional affordable housing to Durham? Durham is not lacking housing, lacking affordable housing. So I have not yet heard from anyone to explain to me how it's going to bring affordable housing, more affordable housing, permanent affordable housing. And one other point that I do want to make, just to kind of stay on schedule, or excuse me, on path, is I want to kind of break down the PATH program and how that's going to bring an additional affordable housing, because we do not support
Great. So I just want to make sure we stay on task here, and I hope, I mean, it's unfortunate what's happening with Habitat for Humanity. I hope you guys get that figured out over there. Tonight, we're going to focus on these items here, what's in the document, and we're still on buffers. So I want to get us back to that. And if we can close buffers out, I would love for us to get to PAT, because I know that's one of the big ones that we wanted to talk about. So my goal is to keep us on task here. So I understand what may have happened in the process, JCCP, all of that there, but I want to make sure that we stay here and discuss the actual content.
So, Leo, we've been over here kind of taking notes, you notice our board is heavy, so we're gonna put stuff up here. So, Tom, if you allow me, if you could, I think you stated that you had 2 issues around the uses or elimination of buffers. So can we get those up here?
Do you want me to write?
No. If you
Clearly,
could,
you want me to say?
I want you to say it, so we can describe it, and then we had a response from Mr. Anthony, so let's see if we can dig down deep. I remember you saying, and you may have to explain a little bit about top level uses and what that means for folks. When you talk about the reduction of buffers, I believe you said top level uses, and you gave an example about additional neighborhoods maybe being built or beside high-rise buildings. So if you could give me your 2 issues.
So SCAD does 2 things with buffers that I'm not satisfied with. And the first is the elimination of buffers between top level use categories. And what are top level use categories? That's like residential to residential, commercial to commercial, office to commercial. Those are the top level use categories. Now, inside these use categories, there are all different levels of uses. So in the residential category, a 10-story residential apartment building is residential, and a 1-story single-family house in a traditional neighborhood is residential. SCAD would eliminate the current buffer requirement between those 2 things, and I don't think that's appropriate. Should we eliminate buffer requirements between commercial uses? I'm untroubled by that. But where
Is that a
we,
point of agreement right here?
that could be a point of agreement, certainly. So that's the first one. The second one is the exception from buffer requirements between residential and non-residential uses for projects that are on lots of 20,000 square feet or smaller.
Elimination of buffer requirements.
That's an exception to buffer requirements wherever they exist. And my problem with that is when you look at the zoning map, in other words, if you look at
Let
the,
us grab it.
Okay.
Elimination of
it's the
buffers.
exception from buffers for commercial projects of 20,000 square feet or smaller. And while that's cast in SCAD as an exception to the buffer requirement, when you look at the map of Durham, almost all intersections of commercial and residential are on lots smaller than 20,000 square feet. Not all of them, but broad swaths of Durham would be exempted.
Give me an example of that.
So on Broad Street, between say Clarendon, between Knox Street and Guess Road, you've got Walltown neighborhood on one side and the Watts Hilladale and Old West Durham neighborhoods on the other side. Broad Street is zoned a combination of general commercial, office institutional, commercial neighborhood, all commercial zones, and those are the lots on both sides of Broad Street. Behind them are traditional neighborhoods zoned for in low density residential zones. Right now, the zoning code requires that there be a buffer between, if you build a business on Broad Street, you've got to install a buffer, and there are options in the buffer category, but normally it's a strip of land with planting. That's the base requirement. And that can be reduced and changed if you choose one of the options. SCAD would exempt a project that's on a lot that's smaller than 20,000 square feet. But SCAD also does this, and this is the thing about SCAD, you can't just read one provision, because other provisions impact. SCAD allows on these 20,000 square foot project or smaller projects for the developer to choose the commercial infill dimensional standards, the rules for commercial infill. Currently, you can't do that. And then it changes the rules for commercial infill to reduce the rear yard requirement and eliminate the side yard requirement. And so you could build a building across property lines. And so you could go from a 10,000 square foot property to a 10,000 square foot property to a 10,000 square foot property and have no buffer for the residences who live behind.
Excuse me, Tom, twice already you've said, I'm sorry, Tom Hennessey. Twice you've said that SCAD eliminates side yard setbacks for a CI zone parcel. Is that correct?
Right.
I'm looking at it right now. In fact, I'm an owner of a CI zone parcel. There are no side setbacks right now. I think SCAD does not change that.
I know,
So why do
SCAD
you keep saying that SCAD changes or eliminates side setbacks for a CI zone parcel? Can you clarify?
Yes, I can clarify, and you're correct. Currently, the CI commercial infill was developed by a community group getting together to address the problem of old commercial development along West Chapel Hill Street in the Birch Avenue and West End neighborhoods. The zoning code, as it was rewritten in 2006, made it very hard to do anything with those buildings. It made them all non-conforming. And so the community got together and I forget the name of the organization, the Quality of Life, the QL group, got together and they changed the rules and created a new zone for that area. It was called commercial infill, so that those properties could be redeveloped within certain limits. Because all of those commercial buildings actually go from side to side and that join together, they changed the rule to allow that. So you're right, SCAD doesn't eliminate the side yard requirement. What SCAD does is expand CI into OI, CN, and CG at the developer's option and eliminates the buffer requirement.
Okay, let me clarify that one as well. So by eliminating buffer and specifically about side yards, I do think that you are speculating and making things sound much worse than actual reality based on the North Carolina Building Code. And the building code will say that if you would like operable windows for apartments, right, housing that we might need in the CI zone, upper story residential, which the CI zone allows, that those operable windows need to be 10 feet off of your property line, your side property line, for purposes of egress, fire safety, and building code provisions. So please, let's not forget that every single building, if utilizing a CI standard, will be built from line to line. That simply will not happen.
Can I interject? I think your point is a really good one. And just know that there are sites that would show up with inoperable windows just so that they can be closer. And that is why we need to be specific and however, because what he's pointing out, what Tom has pointed out, which I didn't even think about, is what happens with OI and CG. And so you may have CI, which is already, set to remove the setback. But for OI, which is office institutional, and CG, which is commercial general, those uses are very different and they may not need operating windows. They may not need to open the windows at all. So how do we make sure that we're not allowing those uses to create an issue for a neighbor who lives in the community?
I think we're getting off on a tangent on speculating. Let's go along with your analogy of no operable windows. Well, that means, I guess, your building's 2 feet, 5 feet away from that sideline living on it. So then the purpose of buffers is to reduce an intense use. What use can occur in a 1 foot or 2 foot strip? Cars can't drive there, there's no headlights, there's no noise, there's no operable windows. So why would you need a buffer in that situation?
The buffer would be for the neighbor on the other side, not for the building itself, where the headlights and all would be.
This is Tom Miller. And I'm not concerned about the side yard. And so if you have a CI zone and somebody builds, and that's commercial infill zone, and somebody wants to build a building in that goes from side lot line to side lot line that currently exists in CI and CI allows, SCAD would extend to these other zones. That doesn't bother me so much. What concerns me is the fact that the 20,000 square foot property thing eliminates the buffer for the neighbor behind. Because that's what happens. This is the real world, is that we have roads like West Chapel Hill Street, where the road itself and the properties that front it on both sides are zoned for commercial uses, CI, CN, CG, these things. And then behind them are people's homes. Right now, there's a buffer requirement. If SCAD passes, the buffer requirement will go away or can be easily manipulated so that the project is built across parcels which are 20,000 square feet or smaller. There's no buffer requirement, but the building itself can jump over property lines. And so you'll know, I cleared this with Sarah Young, and she agrees that this is true. So, and whilst the commercial infill zone was created for this one little strip of property on West Chapel Hill Street over in the Birch Avenue and Old West End neighborhoods, SCAD will change and extend the CI applicability to all these other zones as well, to places where currently today there's no CI zoning, but there is office institutional zoning, there is general commercial zoning, where there is neighborhood commercial zoning. And my feeling is that the buffer, it is appropriate to have buffers between those incongruent uses, and making a 20,000 almost half acre exemption is not appropriate, especially when you look at the map of Durham and those places where commercial and residential come together. Most of the parcels are smaller than 20,000 square feet.
All right.
Tom, your solution is you don't want the exception. Is that what you're saying?
I don't want the exception, but I offer in return a negotiated examination of buffers. Because if I understand it, the objection to buffers is they use up land that might be used another way. So let's look at our buffer requirements and see if we can add practical, inexpensive alternatives to the current buffer options. Can we make a buffer? Right now, if you build, you can have a narrower buffer if you build a wall, but the wall has to be masonry. Well, that's expensive. What if the buffer but it's 100% opaque? If you make 100, you don't have to build a masonry wall to achieve 100% opacity. I'm speaking only for myself. This is not something that I can bring to the table and say all owners of residential property are going to agree with. But I would certainly be willing to consider a thoughtful buffer that is narrower than the minimum, but has a 100% opacity barrier in it. It's not a masonry wall. I mean, what about a board fence? That's erected and maintained.
So you are suggesting appropriate buffer types based on.
So I would like to go back and revisit the buffer things. I agree with Jim that instead of having just broad zoning categories and say this zoning, if you have this zoning, you have to have a buffer no matter what's next door. Let's look at uses. Because in addition to having these broad top level areas, we also define all sorts of uses. I think that eliminating buffers between like top level uses in the residential area is not appropriate. I would though like to go back in and say there may be situations where a buffer between residential intensities is not necessary. But there are other places where I believe differences between residential intensities, a buffer is necessary. Let's look at that.
Gotcha. So we're gonna need to move on.
Yeah.
We need to get this a bit more succinct. We've been on buffers for a while. I don't know if buffer is the only item of concern. I want to make sure that the proponents understand the issue here or what the concern is, and we can describe that here. I'm going to ask that we not editorialize as much. Let's make our point and then get to the discussion to discuss it. We're at 5:50 and we've only talked about buffers. So want to make sure we're good here, and we are going to, is there one final response before we move on?
I just wanna just give a little bit of a caveat in that this is why this process needed to be a little bit more interactive, because this is how each of those cases that Tom just announced are just specific to his expertise and understanding. And we've yet to even talk about the parking, we've yet to talk about the conservation subdivision, the storm drainage, or even the small lot conversation in the historic neighborhoods. And each of those are gonna need to have a specific, intense level of scrutiny, because you're changing it for the entire county. And I don't see how we move forward without going that deep into just buffers, for the rest of the items. And so I do want to be, mindful of folks' time, but I also want to make sure that we're not destroying the city and the county.
I think point well taken. Quick question. How many meetings have you guys been able to engage with?
We had 3.
I mean, from the very beginning of the process. Okay, and
And they weren't meetings, they were presentations, they weren't meetings, let's be clear. We did presentations.
so there hasn't been any engagement opportunity.
Yeah, there was audience
Okay,
engagement. Tiffany Elder, there was audience engagement. There, he asked for suggestions. There have been changes to SCAD due to those suggestions, countless changes that have been made based on our asking for feedback at those meetings and outside of them.
Okay. There was a question over here, Ms. Burris.
Yeah, I just have a question.
I'm sorry, Ms. Frederick.
This is Donna Frederick. Question. We were talking about buffers and we were saying we're gonna get deep. I think that's when I walked into the room, we said we're gonna get deep. We need to get deep because buffers are quality of life. If you drive around to neighborhoods and not just look at a blueprint on paper, it's a quality of life. If you put houses against houses, they all have, guess what? HVAC units. Guess what? They buzz 24 hours a day. If no buffers, guess what? It affects the quality of life. So that's just a small example. So what I'm saying is this needs to go back away and really look at the reality of it. The reality is we do want to increase housing. No one ever said, but the way it's not, I said, really, you have to really be intentional. And I think this has not been intentional. There probably are some projects that are building and waiting for this, so you can build, but it's not the quality of life that Durham deserves. And that's why this is pushback.
And I want to make sure we're not pushing back on discussion, but we won't spend 10 minutes making one point either. So I want to make sure we can have a discussion and everyone gets a fair chance to engage. Ms. Burris?
Yeah, this is Charlotte Burris. Another thing I want to put out on, I know it needs to be about planning. We have to talk about the safety issue too. I mean, we're talking about building, talking about buffers and all this. You need to talk about the safety issue, because I heard just come across the floor inoperable windows. Suppose you have to jump out of those windows. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. You got to talk about a way of escape. We're talking building here, when we also need to talk about the safety of the people in this community by which y'all are building, and we have to live. So you're right, it's gonna take more than this, but I really want us to realize what we're talking about. We got people's lives in our hands here. We're just not talking about just building a building. You know, do you want to go to sleep at night and then the building fall on somebody and you was the contractor or developer of that building? How would you make it? I mean, I'm not fussing, I'm just being real. On the state, we need to talk about safety issue as well when we talk about building.
Thank you. Point taken, Ms. Burris. All right. I want to make sure we have the clear points up here for the buffers. If there's another response that needs to be had to it, if not, we're going to move on.
And if I could. If we were in a courtroom, I couldn't do this. Cause y'all take you gotta get down, and you gotta talk about real issues and points of agreement. So far, Tom has identified for you all these two situations that he would like addressed. This is the point where he's saying that there can be some further examination of these two issues. What is the response of the opponents to that? To his, the suggestion of a negotiated examination of the buffers, and I think he also said that we need to take a look at the top level use categories to try to expand that. A task force is formed with the intent of you having completed a mission. It doesn't have anything to do with the vote of the council. And whether they pass it or not, you still need to understand what's happening, because we're always changing, right? And so it's gonna require whatever they do, further talk. So this is what I hope is not, you're not rushing for some deadline, but that you take a concerted effort in trying to address these problems so that at least when it comes up, you will have the opportunity to say, these are some points that we absolutely know we may need to do some further work. You all can talk about whether you want to delay it or not. But come on, let's talk about, he made an offer. What is the acceptance of that? These are the two issues that he's identified pretty clearly, I think. Everybody kind of understands it. So what is the offer? What is the expectation around what he set as an offer? An offer requires acceptance or rejection. What y'all got to say about that? So let's talk. Mr. Anthony.
Thank you, Mayor.
Give me, I'm gonna put up here on this board about that.
My proposal, as the proponent, is that we sit with the planning staff and develop a district by district buffer recommendation that hopefully helps us recreate the great neighborhoods of Durham like we all know and love, where there are apartment buildings and duplexes and single family homes that range in price. Well, at one time they ranged in much more reasonable price band, but there's some fabulous neighborhoods all over the city. That's what we're trying to do, is to make that possible again. That was the whole purpose behind SCAD. Dozens of
You're saying
people.
your answer to this is that there is another convening of a smaller group of people who will actually sit down and do this examination. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and the planning department has to be at the table.
And who will you include besides
With this group here,
developers?
One second.
with this group here, is what you're saying. That this group,
I think it would be unwieldy to have this entire group trying to address this simultaneously. I prefer to have a subgroup, if that's conceivable and acceptable.
so that's your counter offer.
Mhm.
What do y'all think about that? You actually have a smaller subgroup of you all to sit down with city planning and begin to do that process.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, Charlie DeBurge.
1 second, please.
No, my point was, not me, I'm not an expert on numbers, but I think there's been too many meetings that are just developers and the planning department. And that's a source of a lot of mistrust and problems. For instance, in this, Tom and Charlita and Donna, maybe they want to be in on that meeting too, to express the concerns of citizens. Not just the planners and the.
So that's, you're saying a subsection of this group, with those who have expertise, sit down with the planning department and the developers to delve into this issue. Is that one solution that we have to look at this particular issue on public? Who's willing to do that?
I certainly would be willing to
Tom,
do that.
the Tom name up there, who, Tom, who else? Come on, give me some volunteers.
Are you talking about citizens as well? Or you
Yeah.
just talking about? I would, and the reason, oh, I'm sorry, Charlie the Burst, and the reason I'm saying this,
I think you're probably gonna have to grow from this group too. I
Oh.
mean, just, I'm looking at the people that are in the black, we're gonna try to contain it to this group if we can.
Yeah.
So, Charlita,
okay.
Donna,
Tiana.
I would an alternative be included in this process. I'm an alternative. Can I even get in this conversation? I need to know
we're
that.
gonna, we'll get to that. Let's try to get to some solutions on what kind of format we're going to use to deal with these two issues around buffers. I heard Councilwoman Freeman says that this requires a deeper conversation. Okay, so we need to have that deeper conversation. This is the offer and the counter offer. Small subgroup.
One moment, please. We have a commentary from our subject matter expert.
Thank you. Yep.
Danielle Spurlock, UNC City Regional Planning. There is a process that's coming and it's what the staff have suggested, which is to do it in the UDO rewrite. So I'm doing that because it seems like we're spinning our wheels trying to find a group to do the work that there's a consultant that's going to
Would
do.
everybody be satisfied with that? As a great suggestion.
If not including the people.
So, pardon me,
So let her explain what that process means. Let's get some clarity.
no, you're fine. I just want to be sure that we are keeping order and just as, you know, if we have comment from the floor or public comment section, then we'll acknowledge them, but we won't tolerate the outburst.
My understanding is with the consultant, they are going to do the rewrite differently than it's been done in the past in other places where you kind of send your ordinance off, a consultant writes it. They are going to try to incorporate a much more robust community engagement process, similar to what was done with the comprehensive plan, meaning they have I think they have consultants for both the technical legal work as well as the community engagement for the ordinance rewrite.
Okay, is that the compromise?
One second, Ms. Burrs. I also wanted to highlight, we have the UDO rewrite coming up, but I think what we have to address is the matter at hand with the policy. So again, we're not making final decisions tonight. The council will determine if we not pass it and it moves on. So I just don't want us to have expectations and we don't have any control over that.
But it is acceptable to hear from folks on the task force as a recommendation if you would like to push it to the UDO rewrite.
I agree.
It would be helpful to know if that's acceptable. So.
This is Charlie the Burst. The only other comment I would say is that I think community input is important. And also if we do this and come together and present a model, an actual model instead of doing it on the paper like the architect, a model with the trees, the buffers, how it actually will look. So people can visually see what it would look like. And that way you can kind of get more community, input as to, it's just like how you model your home, how you want it, set up or whatever. And I think that would help us out a lot too. Because all of us got different designer ideas.
So, Tom, does this address the issue that you want to bring forth, at least the first issue?
So if the decision is just to have a subgroup of this work on it, then I'm willing to work on it with the clear understanding that I do not pretend to speak for all neighborhoods or all neighborhood advocates. I lived in Durham all my life, and what I've learned over that time is that my experience isn't of all neighborhoods. Durham is bigger than my experience. So I'll do that. If the decision is to push this into the UDO rewrite, which we're going to have to do anyway, I would be interested in that, but I share everyone's concern that we in fact have robust and transparent community input. And I will say that in something as complex as this, whether it's SCAD or the UDO rewrite, achieving effective community engagement is going to be a job all by itself.
And I don't want you to feel like your commentary is limited. I agree, you don't speak for all of Durham, but your point, well taken. As a task force member, that's what we're trying to accomplish tonight. So thank you for that.
Anything else? Any other issues you all want to address?
Mr. Chapman.
Thank you. My name is Bob Chapman. There are projects, if you were here yesterday, that are ready to go, that are important projects, that won't happen unless these amendments, unless SCAD is passed. You heard from Tiffany, you heard from Tom, you heard from others. And I'm looking at something that came in yesterday's mail from HUD. There's a national program which was originally called the YIMBY Act, which stood for Yes in My Backyard, as a way to deal with the national crisis of housing. And it's changed its name to Pro Housing Pathways for Removing Obstacles. They're offering $85 million to communities that will show that they are removing barriers caused by outdated zoning, land use policy, or regulations.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
It may be beneficial to propose those projects that need to move forward in a compilation essentially proposing the projects as a test so that they can move forward, since you're saying they're ready to move forward, and then attaching some of those SCAD related items in those projects.
Well,
So that we can see it happen, and then proposing it to that $85 million process that you're sharing to them.
the timing is very tight, but if SCAD were to pass, which it could, we would be very much teed up.
I would say that you wouldn't need SCAD to pass in order to move forward. You would be.
No, this is for legislation that has implementing legislation that has taken place already, is how I read it. I haven't gone through every detail in it. I did meet with Keith yesterday, the assistant city manager, and gave him a copy of it, and he was distributing it to see what the other reaction might be. What we're looking at is a document that proposes 131 changes. It follows on to something that was very successful called expanded housing choices. I was watching Channel 11 back in August, and the person, Lindsay Thomason, the director of development and advancement for Habitat for Humanity, was talking about a project called North Plum. I think it's called Little Plum.
Called Skinny Plum.
Skinny Plum.
I'm here, so I can speak to that project.
And one of the quotes that she made is, without the changes in the code, we could have only built 2 houses on these lots, but now we're able to build 7. That was a direct result of the expanded housing choices, which I was privileged and to work on as part of the practitioners panel. What SCAD consists of is a lot of little pop-ups that prevent affordable housing or any housing from being built across Durham. And of these 131 technical small changes to a group of ordinances which now measures 3,970 odd pages from 16 back in the 60s. It's an incredible amount of material. The zoning code alone is a part of that, but there are other related documents, not counting the building code. The staff of your planning department, which is excellent, went through and made and released a report in which they said they recommended 94%, 96.1% of these changes, some of which they recommended subject to evaluation during the UDO rewrite. That remaining 4%, they made 5 suggested changes to, only 5 suggested changes, all of which were agreed to by Mr. Anthony and are ready to be incorporated in a change. This is a bold moment, but we have a real crisis, and we have people who have donated all of our time, our effort.
I don't.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, that's enough. Thank you.
Can I just respond to, just because he made comments?
Subject matter expert. But we really have to get to some work.
But
Yeah, we'll be here.
I want to thank Mr. Chapman for providing the pathway, the pro-housing documents yesterday. I had heard about it, but didn't see the deadline. The deadline is November 6th. And they require 15 days for the application to be published. I will say, this is, the government is going to come back around because they had to extend it anyway. I don't know that a lot of municipalities were ready to move. What it does allow is for the development and evaluation. It doesn't sound like things have to be done, that they are going to be very expansive in the applications they allow. So it doesn't have to be this hard deadline of the 6th. Instead, we can think about how this feeds into a stronger application down the road.
Thank you.
So,
And I'd like to say too.
Yes, one moment.
Just to address, Bob's point of our skinny plum lot. So this is true. Habitat, requested a rezone for some land that we own that was zoned for 2 homes. We were able to build 7 homes. We are not opposed to rezoning. We are opposed to large scale changes such as this SCAD document that opens up the floodgates for not even just you all sitting around this table to come in and make detrimental changes to our community. So yes, you're right. We have made changes and there's a number of different projects that we have that there's some things that are proposed that SCAD could help us. But we can't be selfish and say, yes, this is going to make our work easier and we'll be able to build more homes. Because that's not the business that we're in. But I just wanted to address.
Thank you. And I also want to make sure we get back to the points so we can actually have something to leave here with.
so far, we've gone through, the 2 issues. We have 2 options to consider. One is that, you have a working group, with the planning department, to help kind of engineer what this examination will be, or you can utilize the UDO rewrite process to handle it. But both of them is really clear that you're gonna need some community engagement in either process. Did we capture this pretty succinctly? Okay, hey, we got one thing done and like. So what I'm gonna suggest is once we get your framework, then when you come back on Friday, that's when you fill it in, right? You go deeper. What I'm gonna ask y'all to do though, is please don't be tone deaf. People are having problems with SCAD. That's the purpose of it. Yeah. Right? That's the purpose of it. So it's better to have an open mind on where you have points of agreement and where you can move and where you can test some things. That's the beauty of this. He has put up some money for this document to be done. The city of Durham can make use of that. How do we make use of that for the betterment of Durham? So I want you all to, keep that in mind. Please open your minds up so that we can find some commonality. We can come back and fill it in, but we at least need to have a general outline of where those problems are and how we are going to work through some of these things. Who's got the next issue? Give us another issue.
ADU sizing was an issue that Tom brought up yesterday, so let's put that up there. And that's a real simple one to resolve. It either goes more or it doesn't.
Okay.
And then
Explain
how
what
much
ADU
more?
all that stuff.
I'm sorry.
If you're talking to.
Jim Anthony, accessory dwelling unit sizing. That's the question at hand. I think there's also perhaps a design issue that Tom had a concern about. I'll let him talk.
Excuse me.
So an accessory dwelling unit.
1 second, hold on 1 second.
Excuse me. With all due respect, and I'm trying to go by protocol as best as I can.
Okay.
But since I am a alternative through this process, and I was surely defined, I talked not a lot yesterday. I just want to know one particular thing. If I need to address, if I want to address, if we are going to address something, will I be confounded or handcuffed to this 2-minute stuff?
No.
But I should not be.
No.
I want to
The
know.
task force, so a task force.
So I just want, so I should be able to come in.
With the task.
So, all due respect, I should be able to come in to this discussion as of now, if I need to, correct? I just want to be clear on the protocol.
Yes, sir. Did you have anything you want to add to the buffer?
Not to the buffer, I want to add to the pack.
Okay, all right, so we got that. I think somebody mentioned path. Okay. Okay, did y'all want to talk about path next? It's just
Well, Pat that was what was suggested over here. Also ADUs was an issue that we discussed here as well.
And it's probably not a bad idea.
Got there. Explain what it is.
Yes, PAP is intended to be some tools to utilize for additional housing creation. And it stands for, who remembers?
Progressing affordably towards housing.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah. So, the whole idea was to introduce some concepts that were a little more creative than we've dealt with in the community before, such as utilizing parking lots that might be zoned commercial or might not be zoned for any housing at all. Might be residential neighborhoods, very low density, because churches can pretty much go anywhere they want. We wanted to make it possible for churches to develop housing on their properties.
But churches and ADUs aren't part of PAP.
Sorry, let's everybody press time out. In order for us to have a conversation, we have to have order, right? So let's please acknowledge one another. When someone is speaking, allow them to finish before the other person starts. Before you speak, please be acknowledged. We want to be able to have a conversation. Finish your comment, please.
Thank you. There are other tools in the PAP box. One of those had to do with the potential for density bonuses within certain neighborhood districts. And I can't remember all the elements that were causing controversy with respect to PAP. There were a number of them, but I will just say, as the proponent, that the PAP piece of the SCAD project, I'm under no illusion that we're going to pass SCAD as it's written. Just to be crystal clear, no one in our camp is expecting that to happen, nor are we pushing for that to happen. We actually are here to have a dialogue about what ought to be changed. So PAP is one of those areas within the document that may be simpler to set it aside. And so I think if we're going to put it up on the wall, one of the options for PAP needs to be obviously set it aside for a different conversation. There may be some elements in it that broadly appeal, maybe some elements that are broadly controversial, but it is a fairly complex addition to the whole SCAD document and therefore the UDO. So I'm going to put that comment in the way. I also think it's important for us to try to hit some of the highlights of the other more controversial elements within the whole SCAD project. So we can kind of
Can we at least get head nods around the table on the path being set aside? I'm looking around. I just want to make sure that there's no.
So can you be specific?
Are you asking a question?
I do have.
Okay, hold on. And I just, so for the folks who are not nodding their head, if you want to make a statement
Yes.
as to where you are on it.
Okay.
That would be helpful. And then you can ask your question. And then you can ask your.
State your name.
Joseph Fleming. From the Hayti Development Organization, and also one of the members on this panel. I want to address a couple of things pertaining to this PATH program, but I must articulate some other things before we get into that point. You know, out of the 122,000 citizen household people that we have in Durham, basically we only have 39,000 people who cannot have a decent living within Durham process. Overall, the Durham Housing Authority have a certain amount of units based on the limited resources which they have to deal with. One thing that is clear pertaining to that, 3,500 of the person waiting on the list pertaining to those 700 units that could be available. We only have 8,000 people on the list pertaining to vouchers that's available for them to use on the open market for the type of houses on the market. What my major concern is simply this. we are talking about overall the process of getting affordable housing. Well, who is the main element who normally established affordable housing for Durham? It was Habitat for Humanity. They are the main one. Last year, they were only eligible to have 17 houses be able to be developed. Okay, now if we look at the budget for 2024 from Durham, if we put that in the mix, then we would still have 3,500 people, correction, 35,000 people still needing housing in Durham. So we come down to the point, who is making housing in Durham? Now, who are the eligible elements to make housing in Durham? Basically, Habitat for Humanity will make affordable housing and also the developers. The developers have a process already intact, not the path. A process already intact in which they can make affordable housing. They don't need to implement SCAD just to get more affordable housing. We don't have to do that. The process is already in the mix, and the particular zoning process also clearly define any builder, any developer can build as many houses necessary in Durham as necessary. And they can choose to make affordable housing while we are not getting affordable housing. So the path process is not necessary at all.
So you're okay with setting it aside?
Setting it
Anybody
aside.
who's not okay with setting it aside?
So I don't want to say I'm not okay with setting it aside. If setting it aside means forgetting it, I'm against it. PATH has, this is Tom Miller, PATH has two components. In the shorthand is, there's the 25% component where if 25% of a project is affordable, the developer gets 2 extra market units for each affordable unit. And those affordable units would have very short affordable lives. And so I would set that aside because we already have bonus programs that don't work very well. And I would like to talk about that later, making our bonus programs work better because it's very similar. But the other component of PATH is 100 is exceptions from zoning provisions or loosened zoning provisions for affordable projects that are 100% affordable. Who develops these projects? Habitat, community land trustees, CASA. There's some national people who like CASA who do this, and I learn of new ones all the time. I am intrigued about the idea of having some special rules to incentivize and make easier the creation of affordable housing in 100% affordable housing projects. And I would love to explore that. And I don't want to set that aside. We might set it aside for the moment. But this is something that when I was on the planning commission, that I began to worry about, that we need to make it easier for these projects. They still need rules and standards. The people who live in them still need the same quality of life as anybody else. But rather, I would like to fix it so that it is a smoother path and a higher road for these 100% affordable developers. And that, to the extent that that's an idea reposed in SCAD for this component in PATH, then I would like to see us work on that, especially with the experts like Tiana, who knows what works and who knows what the impediments are. So if we can rub those out or burnish them down, we can have something that clears the way for these folks.
So your counter offer is to keep portions of it, particularly the ones around
The 100%.
the 100%.
So, Mr. Anthony, as a proponent, it's up to you guys, or it's up to the committee to determine whether that's how we move forward as a recommendation, whether we keep a portion of it, or if we set the policy proposal aside as a whole.
Joseph Fleming, we already have
One second.
we already have Joseph Fleming. We already have the density bonus. We already had that already established.
Understood.
Okay, I just want to make sure that was
So
clear.
I just want to say on process, I think that the best thing would be to move these either ors to the Friday conversation and to lay out the rest of them so that we can move to the ADUs and at least get at least 3 for Friday to continue. So I think the either or is already framed. And if there's anyone else who wanted to offer an opposition, I think.
If I can just respond. Tom Hennessey, I could just respond real quick. You made a great point about the density bonus. And I think the planning director is on record multiple times saying that's rarely, if ever, used. And I can speak as a practitioner, infill builder, as to why there are some serious roadblocks as to why very few, if any, people utilize it. So, for example, on a lot that you could build a duplex using that density bonus to get 4 units. Now you're talking about a multiplex. In most lots, a multiplex isn't even possible. The UDO doesn't even allow it based on the width of the street and size requirements. And then, of course, parking requirements, which hopefully we'll talk to. Lastly, once you get into that 3rd or 4th connected unit, then that kicks in the fire suppression and all sorts of commercial building code. Now, that's actually an interesting thing because the state legislature recently made a building code change to take 3 and 4 units out of the commercial code and put it into the residential code, which actually promotes affordable housing development for 3 to 4 units. I think that's extremely exciting. And I think as a county as a whole, we can utilize that and think about that building code change and say, how will it be easier to build 3 or 4 units, to make some more units and utilize that density bonus? I think you make an excellent point. The building code change actually supports.
Thank you. Is there anyone that has any objection to the proposed SCAD alternative? You're itching to say something, Bob.
So on this one, got 2 officers, y'all in their bed, set it aside.
I just want to endorse setting it aside. A quick one, as a point of preference, I did the very first and for a long time, the only density bonus rezoning ever done in Durham, which was the gas station out on North Duke Street. And we made provision for affordable housing for nurses at now called Duke Regional Hospital.
Okay, so that covers the path, so we can move forward to ADU, and then I heard Tom say parking.
I just want clarification. Can we clarify what set aside means?
Just Anthony.
Yeah. Set aside means it gets eliminated.
So you all are delving into that Friday. All right, we're making some progress. That's all it took.
Okay, Roger. Really, I'm not an expert on this at all, but one thing I is that there's no reason that some of these other ideas can't be crafted into a standalone amendment that you can either add into the rewrite of the UDO or propose it. And I would say, you know, the proponents here, they got their money. I read an article today, they got $30,000 and it's $4,000 for the application fee. But there's no reason that you can't come to your electeds or to the planning department with a good amendment that just standalone addresses your issues for habitat and make that doable. You know, totally separate from SCAD. I mean, just a future amendment.
Yeah, hopefully we can define that on Friday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good reasoning to support moving that one option forward. Okay, so for the accessory dwelling unit, and we're back to, I'm just checking before we go further. But accessory dwelling units and sizing.
Well, you know, you might not.
I'm sorry.
So let me frame the reasoning behind the request for the expansion of the size of an accessory dwelling unit, which is a place for someone to live on an existing home site. So it presumes that there's a house there and there's room to build another house, either attached or detached to the existing house. The reason we propose 1,200 square feet is it does give us the opportunity to get to 3 bedrooms. 800 square feet is a very tight 2 bedrooms. 1,000 square feet is a more comfortable 2 bedrooms. If we're trying to create more housing in Durham, that extra bedroom can actually make a difference. So that's why we propose 1,200 versus, say, 1,000. That's all.
Paul Miller. So as I said yesterday, one of the virtues of Durham and also DHC was we're ADU friendly. And in the EHC, we simplified our old ADU rule, which says the size was a function of the size of the primary unit on the property, to just saying that they can be 800 square feet. I kind of like that because you can have a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit there. But I oppose going to 1,200 square feet. ADUs by their nature, rental property. A rental property, and this is necessary. A lot of people have to have it. They can't afford to buy a home. But rental property is wealth transfer engine. There's nothing inherently affordable about ADUs. A lot of the ADU, I know some people who have built affordable ADUs. It's affordable because they choose to sacrifice the rent that they can get. Other ADUs, probably most of them, I really don't know, I've done no research, are rented at the market rate. As the staff told us over and over again with the EHC, we cannot, under North Carolina law, regulate.
Not a problem. I just wanted, I don't want to treat this like a council meeting, and assume that you have all night. I just wanted to ask if you all could allow us an additional 30 minutes to kind of get through a couple of these items. You're okay?
I will have to
Yeah.
do a little.
I do need to leave. I have a birthday party celebration to go to, which happens to be mine.
Happy birthday. Oh, I just want to make a pause for those who do have to exit, and if there are alternates in the room that would like to sit at the table.
Well, and, all right.
And Tom, you could.
I will wrap.
Be
it
more
up.
succinct.
But the point I'm making,
Because it's your gonna be.
But I don't want to lose the people, quite frankly. But to finish my statement, the staff told us over and over again with the DHC, we can't regulate housing prices. We can regulate housing size, and there's a correlation. Smaller is generally cheaper, not necessarily, but generally cheaper. And so what I like about smaller ADUs is they are more apt to be affordable than bigger ADUs. Bigger ADUs are going to rent for more. 3-bedroom ADU is going to rent for more. When I was on the planning commission, I watched what multifamily developers were building. They were not building 3-bedroom units. They were building 1- and 2-bedroom units. And they said, that's what the market wants. Can we adjust the size of an ADU for practical reasons? I'm interested in it because I've been looking at ADUs when I'm invited to see the new ones. And I've seen some designs that I thought could be better. And if 50 extra square feet would have made the difference, then let's add 50 feet. But these are the kinds of things I'd like to do. 1,200 square feet is too big, in my opinion. It's anti-affordable.
All right, could I, real quickly, the reason apartments don't build 3 bedrooms is they don't want children. That's exactly the reason I built hundreds and hundreds of apartments. I know what I'm talking about. Secondly, an ADU is now countable by a regulation change that took place within the last week as part of the qualifying income stream of a home buyer for a mortgage. This is a wealth building mechanism for people. If they have an ADU, it can now go into the mortgage and the income is part of their base. And it's a way for people to afford a house who could not afford a house by building an ADU.
If I could just ask, our subject matter experts about ADUs and sizing, I'm wondering where the cutoff would be, because why wouldn't it just be 1,500 square feet? Like, what would be the difference?
An extra bedroom is the least expensive thing you can add because the core, the kitchen and the bathrooms and the plumbing and the electrical system are all there. And so the cost of that extra room is the most efficient thing you can add on to
But what would be the difference between that and a house?
it is a house.
Joseph Fleming, came to the ADU. I just want to have a clarification on this because I brought it up yesterday. It's pertaining to the plane element of it. And when I say the plane element, we have the original house, says this device right here. Now, I'm talking about the placement of the ADU. Now, the ADU, is my understanding, historically has been behind the house. But since it's not a clarification pertaining to what we are proposing on the SCAD amendment, it don't necessarily have to be behind the house. It could be really beside the house, or it can be just a couple inches behind, not behind the house, behind the plane of the house. The plane, was I understand, since I'm not an architect, is where the front part of your house begins at, your original house begins at. That's my concern, because as a neighbor, I do not wish to have another person ADU right beside in between my house and their house. Now, that's not correct, nor would I like that. You know, the next aspect, if it's going to be behind the house, that's one thing. You can make probably the biggest house as you want it, per se. Most people may not necessarily like a ADU being much higher than their house, but that's another issue. So my concern, where is the plane element at? Pertaining to SCAD now.
You want to respond to that?
Bob could probably look it up while I'm talking, but I do think that there was a change in theirs.
Just ask for a clarification, plane element, or maybe I misunderstood.
You're talking about the front plane of the house.
The front. Oh, in terms of the orientation and the location of the ADU, like
Yeah.
right now.
SCAD changes it from the back line of the house to the front line of the house. It has to be behind the front line, which means it can be beside the house as opposed to behind it.
Yeah, I mean,
SCAD makes that change.
my guess, slight speculation, is that you have a garage and put an apartment above it. You know, your garage could be connected to the main house rather than being attached all the way on the backyard. That's one option, I guess, for the change.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the location, the location of the ADU per se. Okay, it's just like this device right here. This is my original house. Now, if I'm going to make an ADU, it could be virtually right beside that. You know, instead of being behind that device right there. That device right there is the original house. That's my concern. As a neighbor right here, I do not necessarily want that ADU be right in between your house and my house. Okay, if it's going to be in the back, that's one thing. The SCAD has made that transformation or that change. It's not necessarily in the back, no way.
So I think to clarify, could you clarify what SCAD does between an attached and a detached ADU? So the example you gave was like, I guess, an ADU over a garage that may be beside the house.
As one example, if your yard is wide enough, and we're talking about the urban tier, the typical yards, the average yard is 50 feet wide. So I don't think we'll see a whole lot of ADUs right there on your street yard, right out in front of the house. It's more likely than not going to be behind. You'll have a 12-foot driveway that
But I'm
leads
not
back.
saying it's going to be in front of the house. I'm not saying that.
On the same line you're talking about.
On the same line, just a little bit behind that, but they have removed it from being exclusively behind the house. They have moved that so it can be somewhere else in between, and basically it almost can be in conjunction with my house, the neighbor.
So Mr. Fleming, your point is, you're saying that you want to hear language that exclusively states that UDO must be behind.
Or, you know, where it's basically going to be, since you have taken the position to move it from behind, you really need to make it clear where are some of the options in which it can be moved to. So I'm talking about a person who is your neighbor now.
Gotcha.
It may be beneficial to just have it stated that it's behind unless there had to be, there would have to be a process that they went through to shift that. Just depending on, because I know there's difference in the lots and the way the lots stayed and all of that, so. I think just noting that,
Ryan Stokes here from
putting the ADU specifically behind the house. Unless, it went through a specific process.
You're gonna still be required, like, you're gonna have side set, you're gonna have all the setback requirements on an ADU that you would have on that existing house, so your neighbor could build an ADU, or they could expand their house there. Like, they're allowed to build in the area that they're allowed to build, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, SCAD doesn't say that you can build in extra, specifically with regards to the ADU positioning that you're talking about, back to front, or not. So your neighbor could still build their existing house out to whatever that setback is, to where they could also build that ADU too, so they have that right already, essentially. Did you have a comment? Tom?
Well, maybe there is a sense of confusion in terms of attached ADU. I recently went through this with planning with my project at 827, 829 West Markham, where if the ADU is attached to the primary structure, that is actually considered part of the primary structure and has to respect all primary structure setbacks. So the attached ADU provisions, based on my understanding with discussions with planning, is to have two ADUs attached to each other for attached house lots. So if the ADU is attached to the main house, single family house, it will still have to respect the 6-foot side yard. That's normal. That's the buildable envelope anyway. Doesn't really change anything.
I guess I have not seen many ADU per se, but those ones that I have seen systematically have been separate, not attached. Okay, and that's what I'm basically speaking the capacity of the non-attached one.
Attached.
So the non-attached ones, you're saying that the positioning should not be,
It should be behind.
it
Should be behind. Should be
It's a
behind.
detached, and that language needs to be clear.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Which means just leave it the way it is.
So,
Is it,
you
public
state
comments?
your
now?
name and
Thank you.
Ms. Cruz, could we make sure that is on?
Good evening. My concern is actually part of the yard setback reduction.
Could you move that mic? Yeah, there you go.
My concern is with the yard setback reduction, exactly paragraph 7.12B, where it reduces the single family detached home yard from 15 feet. I'm going with the size. The sides are 10 feet and now they're going down to be 5 feet. I have a problem with that. I live in a single family home right now, and we have a normal yard setback reductions on the side. Do you know that they throw parties every weekend? My bedroom jumps, boom, 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 with the normal setback. And you're wanting to reduce that? We're now fighting over their dog coming into the yard. Before you make these decisions, you need to go to these houses, mine exactly, and find out what it's like to have a setback and watch a neighbor who's not an owner, but a renter, abuse these setbacks. They grill on the side of the house near our bedroom. I think I'm getting carbon monoxide poisoning due to the windows in their grill. Before that, so therefore I have a deduction in the yard setback reduction. I'm totally against it and have proof on why it should not be used. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right.
We need to make note of that.
Ms. Bates?
Thank you. Regina Mays. If we can have one of the experts come up, please. One of the experts come. Oh, okay.
What's your
So
question?
my question is pertaining, especially now going into what, the lady just spoke of just a moment ago. When we're talking about, this is what I'm gonna say is your living surrounding area, your property. and the interactions that you have with others, your neighbors, that you can control. I would like to see come out of this meeting space, things that allow that quality of life that Ms. Frederick spoke of. Get to a place to where people leave the table with an understanding, regardless if they are the builder, the landlord, whomever, of what does not interfere with that quality of life. So if we can, in my mind, and this might be too far out, I'm kind of combining even this ADU with what she just brought up, because it's all talking about your living space. So can I have an expert come even to Mr. Hennessey's point about, in Mr. Fleming's point about where the ADUs are, how they're positioned. I need the common sense language of what does that look like and how is it going to affect somebody's living space? What is it going to look like when I wake up every day and every weekend if somebody has a celebration, or if I want my family to come and have a celebration?
I can. I just to make sure we're clear on what you're asking. So basically, if there's a square, that square is the yard and it's 50 feet wide. There's a house that is built on that square, let's say 30 feet wide. There's still an additional 20 feet by right. And what the discussion is where that ADU can go. Is it, in the back? Is it on the side? And what I believe Mr. Hennessey was saying was you can build an ADU there. Or even if the language said, no, you cannot put the ADU there, you still can extend the house to the extent of what that 50 feet is, but still have to respect the same parameters, the same laws as what's already in the books. So what Mr. Fleming, I believe, was saying was, can we have explicit language that says it's in the back? Is that correct?
Tom Miller. So I'm looking at the language of the current statute and the SCAD changes. So the current language actually does not distinguish between, in ADU placement, between attached and detached. Both are allowed, but it doesn't distinguish in terms of placement. Perhaps it should. The current rules say that an ADU has to be behind the rear line of the house. SCAD would change it to the front line of the house, which would mean on those lots where there's enough space, you could put the ADU attached or detached between in the side yard and close to the neighbor. SCAD doesn't do this, but currently under the rules, an ADU can be in the RU and RC districts, and for a great portion of Durham's traditional neighborhoods are in the residential urban category. Not all of them, but a great many of them. The side yard for an ADU is 3 feet. And one of the problems that we have had with this is if two houses have ADUs in the side yard side by side, that's a 6-foot interval between the houses. And is that safe? But that's an interesting issue, and it had not occurred to me until we met today that separate treatment for attached and detached ADUs in this area is worth exploring.
I just want to note, if we can, as we're looking at these proposed changes, thinking about our current infrastructure when it comes to firefighters and first responders and how they'll be able to address issues with all these ADUs and changes in the setback. And again, just keeping that in mind as we think about these proposed changes.
Good point. Thank you.
And then I just wanted to throw in as well that I think what I'm mindful of is if you're trying to create real housing, that should be separate from this ADU conversation, but it should be a part. Like, I think that we have to have that conversation, because if you're trying to do the ADU or an accessory, any type of unit on the front lot line, or the same house line, the front lot, that's more like a row house. We need to figure out how you can because I understand that you can't do that, but there should be a way to do that. But it's not an ADU. So I feel like that could be something that could be
Yeah, my
similar to
response,
that path conversation, it could be something that's added.
my response is that just because you call it one thing, doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is. So by saying you oppose ADUs on a front line means you oppose a duplex. So let's think about a single family house that does an addition on an RU5 lot or an RU lot, RU52, RU5, which allows duplexes. So why could a single family house not be converted into a duplex, which is currently legal, which is currently, we want more units, which a duplex, I think no one rejects or opposes duplexes here. But what's the difference between a duplex and a single family with the ADU?
I don't think he was saying, you specifically talking about detached. So it wasn't any issue with the duplex.
I'm aware, but a duplex can be detached in our current UDO.
And the detached duplex has to be set to the same, what do you call it, the same setback.
That's actually not true. You can construct a breezeway, so that's not true.
When you say a breezeway between the houses or between the property next to it?
No, between the houses.
So the property next to it would still have the same setback, that's what I'm saying.
The same side yard setbacks. We're talking about the same thing.
No, you're missing my point.
Please tell me.
The house would still be in the same envelope.
That's correct.
It would not go beyond that envelope. So if it's a duplex, it's in the envelope. When it's attached, it does not sit in the same envelope. It's someone else.
A detached duplex still must maintain that envelope.
But a ADU has the same setback.
The ADU is, depending on what zone, either 3 or a 5 side yard setback.
Right, so there are, one moment. Get some. We're here, a lot of red lights, focus off first.
Yeah, I just bringing the viewpoint of just a regular citizen that doesn't do ADUs, but I think our understanding is that an ADU is a dominant or predominant home. And I thought the idea was to allow homeowners to build a smaller rental in their backyard. A duplex is like there's a landlord that both of them can be rentals and probably usually are. I see that as a different, kind of a different concept than I have a house and I want a mother-in-law home in the back, a casita, like they say in the Southwest, or, separate smaller home in the back. Whereas the duplex is 2 equal, usually mirror image, units that are both rented out. I mean, that's just the layperson's understanding.
Thank you. I want to go to Home Depot, man. Just
Ryan,
right.
Ryan, so just in thinking some of this, I mean, we also have some 0 lot line laws that are currently allowed and things like that. And there's prescriptive things with respect to fencing and things like that as you step out the back of them. I think what Tom was and what I was trying to say to Mr. Fleming's point earlier was that there's an existing thing that you can already build housing to that specific envelope. And if you put an ADU on the side of it, attached or detached, you still have to respect that setback envelope.
Are these the concerns or any more concerns you have, size, placement? And then we had a little bit about, the concerns for nuances once you doing these things. Are there any other concerns? You all can go deeper on Friday, but are there any other issues with ADUs that we need to know?
Yes, ma'am. Charlie Burst, like they said, the other concerns is essential workers. How the fire department, police department will enter these properties. Because sometimes it's a one-way in and it's a one-way out unless they have drive, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They have to have proper entry. That's all that needs to be considered.
We'll set up the building codes, all that stuff to abide by.
Yeah. Just
That's the issue.
Okay, so we're gonna start bringing this to a close. There any closing remarks?
Can I just ask how many more issues that you all think you're gonna need to, I know, more weeks. So Friday night, can we all agree that you'll bring those in as succinctly as you can so that we can just boom, 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 and try to get. I think if we can just get a framework of all of the issues, then you leave yourself home to kind of dig deep and figure out what your alternatives are gonna be for dealing with each one. You know, and then that will give us some commonalities. And then we can kind of think that information and get a timeline on how you want to deal and approach it and give folks time to think about it. So we're going somewhere, but it's important that we get it all out on paper so that we can take them one by one. Oh, your community also had a question for me as to how you wanted to have your community members to be able to speak to this process. So I'm putting it out.
Before we, so we'll address a few comments before we do closing remarks. That's most number.
My name is Kessler. I have a list. Keep buffers protecting neighbors and neighborhood from non-residential development and intense residential development. So you discussed that for an hour today. Small houses and small lot option from EHC. Keep ADUs small, otherwise they would never be affordable. Keep infill standards as they relate to street yards and height. NPO provisions should not be removed. Get rid of the 25% residential and industrial zones. Unlimited ADUs associated with places of worship. Flag lot rule changes. But that's for clarity relative to minimum and maximum parking requirements. 100% affordable housing path rules. Plan density residential rule changes. Maximum building heights and height calculations should be part of the vision of the community. Development of residential corner lots. Street yards should be reevaluated by the residents of Durham. It is an important quality of life issue. Also consider required incentives for small houses in new development. New protections against gentrification for underserved neighborhoods where naturally occurring affordable housing exists. Stronger environmental protections and frequency, strict monitoring during construction phases. Ask the developer to pay for a bus stop, canopy, bike lanes, water and sewer connection, and annex properties as necessary on all projects for more than 3 dwellings on one lot. Public review task force to review all proposals, even those by right. No grading at lot lines. There must be setbacks in every case, and the neighboring property owners is informed before groundbreaking.
Thank you so much. Could you make sure we get a copy of that?
Hi, Sherry Zan Rosenthal, Durham resident. So I have given a copy of my written comments to the clerk. I will provide it to each of the co-chairs also. But I want to say a little something different. As I listen to your discussion, I'm thinking, and I'm going to have to resort to the Yiddish here. What kind of a fakakta process is this? Can't you hear, as you're having these discussions, that every string you pull gets down into the basics of what a development ordinance does? It all goes down to the philosophy of neighborhoods, how they've been formed, what we're willing to change about them. And none of these theoretic discussions, which, you know, you're having in kind of a crazy quilt discussions that really are appropriate as part of the entire UDO rewrite, which is why before the political process intervened, the planning director in June of 22 put out a memo to the JCCPC saying that the SCAD should not be considered as a freestanding thing, but instead should be put into the pot of ideas to be considered during the entire UDO rewrite, because this implicates everything else in the UDO. It's really all of a piece. Now, what you're doing is talking theoretically about these things and not even getting down into the messed up language of each provision. And so what you're going to see in the written comments I gave you is just taking an early provision of SCAD and breaking it out into 2 examples. And I don't even go into all of the ambiguities as to why you look at something that can seem on first glance reasonable, and you think about the implications and you realize the ambiguities, how poorly written it is, and that it could have implications that you don't expect when you just read the facial language. So I'm going to tell you, I think this process is just, aren't you frustrated by it? Don't you hear what a crazy quilt it is? That it really gets down into the basics of what a development ordinance does. And it should be as part of the entire UDO. We should do away with private text.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Rosenthal. All right, are there any closing remarks, brief closing remarks? That we can close out with and get ready for Friday.
Thank you.
I think.
That's my closing remark. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Yeah, this is, just quickly, I think for us who will probably maybe a little more knowledgeable, pictures tell a story. You know, when we went through the 60-something pages, we looked at pictures. And you mentioned that there's some projects that are being held up, that if this passed, they would get done. Could we know what those projects might be tomorrow? If there's something that on paper, this project is ready to go, but we can't get it done. Because it seems to me it's a little speculative, because I looked on Pinpoint and I didn't see any projects that were waiting other than the ones that already been, you know, waiting for a while. So I was just wondering if you could bring those tomorrow. It would be helpful. Say, I got this project, and we can change this Friday. That's.
Thank you. Can I say one thing just real quick? Oh, Ms. Ross.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I agree with what Sherry had said, and I said that in different words quite often during their meeting here. What I want to talk about now, I will talk about it on Friday. But just as I don't know if I'm the only one here, but I'm the only one that has spoken up that lives outside of the city limits. So kind of representing more the county. One big concern I've had is that I think most people have understood SCAD as it's been promoted and advertised as being for infill, being for within the city limits, being more affordable housing on odd lots in the city. But out of the 100, you said there's 131, I counted 132, but whichever paragraphs that the staff has described here, only 10 are limited to the city and of the changes. 122 are specifically to the city and county. And that's a concern. And I can tell you it's a big concern for people that live out in the semi-rural areas out there. So I'm going to talk about that more on Friday, but I just want to set the table. And thank you.
I just wanted to real quick, just say thank everyone, appreciate it, and say that triage doesn't look good. Often triage is very messy. When you think about a military or think back to COVID and the early signs of tend set up to be temporary hospitals and things. We have a housing crisis, we need triage. It's not going to be perfect, but it is more timely. There are provisions in here that have been reviewed, and we do have a UDO rewrite coming up to address them if there are issues.
Thank you, Ms. Burris.
Charlie DeBurse, the only thing I want to say, haste makes waste. And let's be practical, even though you might be spending funding, act like it's your own. Act like it's your own. And if you were supplying other people and other people's lifestyles, what would your lifestyle look like as well? Because let's face facts, you're developers, you're gonna make your money, but let's be practical about how we do it.
Thank you. And we will, close the final comment. Let's, Freeman, anything else has over to the mayor to close it out.
Just gonna try to recap what work you did tonight, give yourselves a round of applause, whatever.
Thank you.
Regard, you have a couple of citizens who have weighed in as well, so that you know the wide range. You have people who believe that there are no good parts of SCAD. There are others who are considering, think that we may need some protection from it, but there's some consideration. You also have folks who have enumerated a number of priorities that they have, and you have come up with at least some solutions to some of the things that have been raised. So you all have done a wonderful job. This is not easy. It's hard work, but we got to start. And this is what you've done tonight. So thank you for the city of Durham.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do any of our subject matter have any comments? Attorney Jewell, thank you for that. Thank you all. We're adjourned.